The wind had a strange way of talking out on the far edge of the high plains, almost like it carried old secrets in its breath. That was the first thing the rancher noticed when he rode past the crooked fence line of the abandoned farm he had just bought. Folks in town said the place had been left to die years ago, that no man in his right mind would try to bring life back to it, but he was not like most men. He was a single dad trying to build a future for his boy, and something in that worn land called to him, as if it knew he needed a second chance just as much as it did. The place sat quiet under the wide sky, barns sagging, fields choked with weeds, and the old cabin half sunk into the earth, like it was trying to hide from its own story. He pushed the door open and felt the weight of the silence. It was not the kind of emptiness you hear in an ordinary room, but the kind that feels like someone just stepped out moments before. Dust was thick on the table, but the air had a faint scent of smoke, as if a small fire had been burning not long ago. That unsettled him, yet he kept moving, reminding himself that the land was cheap because it needed work. He figured he was ready for anything, but this place carried a presence he did not understand. Still, he had come this far, and a good rancher never backs down from a challenge. His boy, a quiet kid with strong eyes, stood beside him as they walked the length of the field together. The boy asked him if they were really going to live here. He nodded, saying it was the only place they could afford and that this broken land might just give them something good if they treated it right. The boy believed him without question because he always had. They unloaded what little they owned and started mending the fence the same day, working with the kind of resolve only people who have lost much can carry, but even from the start things felt off. Fences they repaired seemed bent again the next morning, like someone had leaned against them during the night. A pale curl of smoke sometimes rose from behind the ridge when he knew nobody lived out there. And there were footprints near the creek once, small but sure, shaped unlike any he had seen before. His boy asked about them, but he brushed it off. Pretending it was probably just drifters passing through. At night the horses grew restless. They lifted their heads, ears sharp, staring toward the hills. He would step outside with his lantern and feel the hair on his arms push up against the cold. The breeze carried the faint sound of something moving in the brush. Not an animal, not a settler. Something different, something watching. He stayed up many nights like that, trying to make sense of the strange tension that had settled over the abandoned farm. One evening, he found a small, woven pouch hanging from a post near the barn. It was made with strong hands and decorated with beads and patterns he did not recognize. His heart tightened when he saw it. He knew enough from his years on the frontier to understand exactly what it was, an Apache symbol. Not a threat, not a warning, but a sign that someone wanted to be seen. The boy looked at him with worry in his eyes, but he reassured him they were safe. Inside, though, he felt a knot of questions twisting tighter. The next morning there were signs that someone had been inside the cabin. The broom he had leaned in the corner was resting against the table, and the canteen he had left empty now held fresh creek water. No harm done, nothing taken, just quiet acts that made no sense. The rancher stood in the doorway for a long time, trying to understand. He had dealt with Apache riders before, not in war but in tense moments on the trading route. He knew they moved with purpose, never without meaning. If two Apache women were anywhere nearby, they were passing through land they considered sacred, and if they had come into the cabin, they must have believed they had a right to it long before he ever bought this place. He thought about leaving the farm, taking his boy somewhere easier. But he also knew that land like this did not give itself to a man without testing him. So he stayed, fixing roofs, clearing brush, making the abandoned farm slowly look like a home again. Still, the feeling of being watched never left. Some nights he sensed someone standing just beyond the lantern light, close enough to hear him breathe, yet far enough to remain unseen. He spoke softly those nights, talking to the darkness as if it could understand him. Maybe in some way it did. Weeks passed and the unease only grew. One afternoon he rode out to check the north fence and found fresh tracks in the soil. 2 sets, light, careful, made by feet that traveled this land with deep knowledge. He followed them a short distance and saw a strip of cloth caught on a mesquite branch. It was woven with colors he had seen before, colors used by Apache women. He held it in his hand, feeling the quiet strength in the pattern. Someone was close. Someone who did not fear him or his boy. Someone who moved through the farm as though they belonged to it more than he ever would. Later that night, the horses stirred again. This time there was no breeze, no rustle of grass, no shifting shadows. Just a steady feeling in the air, like the land itself was holding its breath. The rancher stepped out of the cabin, lantern raised, and walked toward the barn. He heard a sound inside, not loud, just a soft shuffle. His steps slowed. He could feel eyes on him, sharp and steady. When he pushed the barn door open, the light swept across the hay and the stalls. It revealed nothing at first, just the usual quiet of late night. But as he turned, he felt a movement behind him, soft and sure, the kind of movement made by someone used to staying hidden. He did not reach for his rifle. Something told him not to. Instead, he waited, heart tight in his chest. The next day changed everything. After finishing the morning chores, he sent his boy out to gather wood while he checked the cabin. He stepped inside and froze. The room was different. The table held fresh herbs he had never seen before. A clay pot simmered over a small fire someone had rebuilt, and in the far corner 2 Apache women stood quietly, watching him with calm, steady eyes. Their presence filled the cabin with a strength that made the air feel different. They were not frightened. They were not hiding anymore. They stood as though they had every right to be there, and as though they had been waiting for him to walk in. His breath caught. His boy was alone outside, and the land was no longer silent before he could speak. One of the women lifted a hand, not in threat but in warning, as if something far greater than their arrival was about to unfold. And that was the moment he understood that the abandoned farm he had bought was not abandoned at all. And whatever story he thought he was stepping into was only beginning. The rancher stood still, hardly breathing, trying to make sense of the sight before him. The 2 Apache women did not flinch or step back. They held their ground with the quiet strength of people who had spent their whole lives close to the earth. One of them, a tall woman with sharp eyes and braided hair wrapped with leather strands, kept her hand raised in that warning gesture. The younger one beside her had softer features, though her posture showed the same steady confidence. Their presence filled the cabin in a way he could not explain. As though they had stepped out of the land itself, he swallowed down his unease. Reminding himself he had seen Apache warriors in tense moments along the trail, but never like this. These women seemed to know the cabin better than he did. It hit him then that maybe they had been living here long before he set foot on the property, moving quietly, leaving no trace except the small signs he had brushed aside. He felt the knot in his chest tighten as he realized he was standing in the middle of a story he didn't understand. His first thought was of his boy outside gathering wood. The land was wide, but danger had a way of moving fast. The tall woman lowered her hand slowly, as if she sensed his fear for the child. She looked toward the door, then back at him, her expression saying she meant no harm. Still, uncertainty pressed hard on him. He did not know enough to trust their presence, and yet something about the way they stood there, unafraid but not hostile, made him hesitate. He tried to speak, but his throat felt tight. The younger woman stepped forward just enough to show she understood his concern. She pointed toward the window, where the barn sat in the distance, then placed her hand over her heart as if to say the boy was safe. He wished he could believe it fully, but the frontier had shaped him into a man who moved carefully. Trust was not something he gave away easily. The cabin fire snapped softly, breaking the heavy silence. The smell of herbs in the clay pot filled the room, earthy and calm. It was not the scent of danger. It carried the smell of healing, of tradition, of knowledge passed through generations. The rancher recognized some of the plants, but not all. Whoever these women were, they knew the land better than he ever would. He stepped back, giving them room. He was not the kind of man to push forward blindly, not when his boy's safety hung in the balance. He lifted his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. The tall woman nodded, a small, measured gesture that felt like the first thin bridge between them. He motioned toward the pot, asking without words why they were here. The younger woman dipped her hand into a small pouch tied at her waist and pulled out a woven symbol nearly identical to the one he had found hanging near the barn. She held it up for him to see. The beads caught the light, arranged in a pattern he did not understand. But he realized then that their presence was no accident. This farm held meaning for them, meaning deeper than anything written in the deed he bought. Before he could question them further, he heard his boy call from outside. It was not a cry of fear, just his voice carrying from the trees. The rancher's heart jumped. He stepped toward the door, but the tall woman shook her head once, a firm move that stopped him cold. She pointed again toward the window, where the land stretched quiet and still. Her message was clear. No danger. Not yet? He pushed open the cabin door anyway and scanned the yard with sharp eyes. His boy walked out of the trees with an armful of wood, looking as normal as any other morning. No shadows followed him. No riders. No movement in the brush. The rancher let out a slow breath, though his pulse still hammered. When the boy reached him, he looked up with wide eyes. He sensed something was different. Children on the frontier always sense things first. The rancher laid a hand on his shoulder and told him to wait by the fence. The boy obeyed without question, but his gaze kept drifting toward the cabin. As though he felt the shift in the air, the rancher stepped back inside, closing the door gently behind him. Now that he knew his boy was safe, he faced the women again with a calmer mind. He needed answers. He pointed to the ground, then to the cabin walls, trying to ask if this land belonged to their people. The younger woman nodded. The tall woman spoke softly in her own language, a tone that carried meaning even if he couldn't understand the words. She reached for a folded piece of hide resting near the pot and held it out to him. He hesitated before taking it. The hide was old, softened by years of use. Symbols had been painted across it in careful strokes, some familiar to him, others not. He traced one with his finger, a mark shaped like a curved path. Another looked like a sunset low on the horizon. He could not make sense of them, but he knew they were telling a story. A story of the land. A story of the people who once lived here. The tall woman pointed to the symbol of the curved path, then pointed to the farm. He realized it marked a route that ran straight through the property. Not a trail for settlers. Not a trading path. Something older. A traditional route used by Apache families long before fences or deeds existed. He felt the weight of that knowledge settle in him. This land he bought with money had once belonged to their ancestors in ways no paper could ever show. He set the hide down gently, feeling respect grow inside him. The women watched him closely, waiting to see how he would react. He did not raise his voice or claim ownership. He simply stood there, breathing in the truth of the moment. The abandoned farm he thought he was restoring was not abandoned at all. It was part of a story far older than his own. Then something caught his eye. A small scar on the younger woman's arm, fresh and healing. It looked like she had been injured recently. That opened a new question. Why were they here? Why now? Were they hiding? Seeking safety? Or warning him of something coming? He pointed gently to the scar. She looked down, then lifted her chin with quiet pride, not embarrassed or ashamed. The tall woman said something sharp and quick in her language, the tone more serious than before. The younger woman lowered her gaze. The rancher picked up on the shift. The injury mattered. It was part of the story they had not yet shared. A soft thud sounded outside like something dropping. Not loud, but enough to make the rancher stiffen. The women turned their heads at the same instant, their eyes sharpening. They did not reach for weapons. They listened. The rancher listened too? The land outside went still again, but it was not the same calm from earlier. It carried a different weight. A warning of its own. The tall woman stepped closer to him and placed her hand on the table. Her fingers rested near the hide map. She tapped one symbol with slow meaning. A symbol shaped like a circle with a break on one side. He had seen that mark before on old trade goods. It meant disturbance, movement, something shifting on the land. The rancher felt the air tighten. Something was happening beyond the ridge. Something the women had been tracking. something that pushed them to step inside his cabin openly instead of staying hidden in the brush. He wanted to ask more, to piece together their story. But the younger woman moved suddenly toward the doorway, her posture alert. The rancher followed her gaze out the window and felt his breath catch. A distant figure stood on the ridge, too far to make out details but close enough to stir every instinct he had. The figure did not move. It watched the farm with the same steady stillness the women had shown, the tall woman's voice lowered to a tense murmur. The younger woman gripped the doorframe as though bracing herself. The rancher stepped between them and the window. Not in challenge, but in shared caution. The ridge figure took one step closer, the rancher's boy. Unaware, played near the fence, and the land itself seemed to hold back its next breath, waiting to see what would come of this unexpected meeting between a single dad rancher, two Apache women, and the silent watcher now approaching the abandoned farm. Nothing was resolved. Nothing was safe. And the story, heavy with old secrets and new danger, was only just beginning to unfold. The ridge watcher did not move again, but his presence lingered like a weight pressing down on the land. The rancher kept his eyes fixed on that distant shape, every muscle ready to react if the figure took another step. The two Apache women stayed behind him, but their posture told him they knew more about the watcher than he did. They exchanged a look, a silent understanding that deepened the mystery surrounding them. The tension in the air thickened until it felt like even the wind refused to breathe. The rancher's boy, still unaware of the danger, played with a small stick near the fence. The rancher wanted to call him inside, but he feared raising his voice might trigger something. So he stepped forward slowly, keeping his gaze on the ridge. The women followed, silent shadows moving with purpose. When he reached the doorway, the younger woman touched his arm gently, urging caution. Her touch carried neither fear nor weakness, only warning. He lifted his hand slightly to signal his boy, who sensed the shift in mood and walked toward him, puzzled. The rancher kept him close, his protective instinct flaring stronger than ever. The boy asked if someone was coming, but the rancher simply told him to stay inside for now. The boy obeyed, though he kept peeking toward the ridge. Sensing the heavy stillness rolling over the farm, inside the cabin the women moved with quiet coordination, gathering their pouches and tools without speaking. The rancher watched them, trying to understand their urgency. He had seen seasoned warriors prepare for danger with the same calm, but these were women seeking safety, not battle. Their steps were careful, their eyes sharp. Whatever was happening on the ridge was not new to them. The tall woman pointed toward the map on the hide. Her finger tapped the circle-shaped mark again, the one that signified disturbance. She traced a line leading from that symbol down toward the farm, then looked at him with a steady gaze filled with meaning he could almost grasp, yet not fully. He sensed the message. Something had been moving through their lands for weeks, and now it had reached his farm. He felt a chill run through him. This place he hoped would be a safe home for his boy might now sit at the heart of something shifting across the frontier. The tall woman stepped closer to him and said a word softly. He recognized the sound from past encounters with Apache traders. It meant danger, but not the kind that came from men with rifles. It meant danger that moved in silence, danger that traveled in shadows, before he could ask more. The younger woman leaned toward the window again. The watcher on the ridge had disappeared. That, more than anything, made the rancher uneasy. He would have preferred the figure stayed visible. Disappearing into the tree line felt like a warning. He stepped out of the cabin again, scanning the open field. The sun sat low, casting long shadows across the land. Nothing moved. No rider approached. No sound came from the brush. But the air felt different, tight like stretched rope. The rancher had lived long enough to know that danger was often quietest right before it. Arrived as the day settled into evening. The rancher invited the women to stay inside the cabin, knowing the night brought new uncertainties. They hesitated, glancing toward the ridge once more, but finally they agreed. Inside, the atmosphere softened a little. The women prepared herbs and offered a small bowl to the rancher's boy, who accepted it with curiosity. The scent was warm and calming, and the boy smiled as he tasted it. The rancher felt a strange sense of peace watching the small exchange. It was the first moment all day that didn't feel weighted with tension. But even then, the tall woman kept listening to the land outside, her eyes moving to the door whenever the wind shifted. The younger woman sat near the fire, mending a strap on her pouch with steady hands. Though her jaw tightened every time a twig snapped outside, the rancher knew they weren't just passing through. They were seeking something, or running from something. Or both. He tried to piece together their story from the fragments they had shown him. The fresh scar on the younger woman's arm suggested a recent struggle. The woven symbols left near his barn meant communication. The hide map showed a path running through the farm that mattered deeply to their people. And the watcher on the ridge was somehow connected to all of it. He began to suspect the women might have been forced from their own place, and the land around his farm was caught in the aftermath. But he could not ask openly. They were giving him pieces slowly, trusting him only as far as they felt safe. It was a delicate balance, one that held the whole story together. Night fell heavy across the farm. The lantern lights flickered inside the cabin, casting long shadows across the walls. The women sat close to the fire, their posture alert but not tense. The rancher stood near the window, watching the open dark for any sign of movement. The boy slept in the corner, unaware of the storm building around them. Hours passed in the slow rhythm of frontier night. The rancher almost convinced himself things might settle by morning. Then a soft sound reached the cabin. A faint crunch of gravel. A careful footstep. Not an animal? Not one of the horses. Someone or something was moving outside with deliberate silence. The tall woman stiffened instantly. Her eyes locked with the rancher's. She pointed downward, signaling him to extinguish the lantern. He did so quickly, plunging the room into dim firelight. The younger woman gathered the boy quietly. Holding him close to keep him calm, the rancher slipped to the door, listening. The footsteps stopped. The night swallowed the sound. He felt the old fear rise, the kind that kept men alive in wild country. Someone was out there, watching the cabin, waiting for something. Minutes passed without movement. The rancher opened the door a crack, looking out across the dark. Still no sign of the ridge watcher. But he sensed eyes on him all the same. The air felt heavy, charged. He stepped outside and let his boots sink into the cool dirt. Behind him, the women watched closely. The younger one whispered something quick to the tall woman, who nodded sharply and moved to the back wall of the cabin. She touched a place beneath the window frame, pressing lightly until a wooden slat opened. The rancher blinked. He had lived here for weeks and never noticed a hidden storage slot built into the wall. Inside the small compartment lay several carved stones, each marked with symbols similar to those on the hide map. The tall woman lifted one and held it to her ear, as if listening for a message the rancher could not hear. Her face changed. The expression sharpened. She whispered a single word that carried clear urgency. The rancher's pulse kicked hard. He stepped back inside, closing the door fully this time. He demanded to know what was coming, using signs and the few words he knew. The tall woman hesitated, then traced a symbol in the dust on the table. It resembled a twisting line cutting through a sun shape. He recognized enough to know it meant a crossing. A clash. Something pushing into land it had no rightful claim to. She pointed toward the ridge and pressed her fist to her chest, showing strength. Then she opened her hand in a sweeping motion, showing danger spreading outward. The rancher understood. Whatever force the women had been escaping was getting closer, and his farm, his home, the one place he thought would keep his boy safe, was caught directly in the path of that conflict. The younger woman stepped forward, took a deep breath, and touched her scar again. She looked the rancher in the eyes, her expression a mixture of warning and plea. She motioned toward the door, then toward the land beyond the barn, pointing to the very direction the watcher had stood earlier. Her message was clear. The watcher was not alone. Something else was moving on the land. Something stronger. Something dangerous. The fire popped sharply, breaking the moment's stillness. The rancher looked toward his boy, sleeping peacefully despite the storm building around him. He felt a heavy ache in his chest. He had chosen this farm to give them a new beginning, not to drag them deeper into conflict. But frontier life rarely honored a man's plans. Outside, a distant sound broke through the night. A low thud like something large shifting its weight. Then another. Not close, but not far enough to ignore. The tall woman's shoulders tightened. The younger one whispered prayers in her language. The rancher stepped to the window and saw a flicker of movement near the tree line. Not the ridge watcher? Something else. A shadow taking shape, tall and steady. The night held still again. Breathless, whatever danger the Apache women had been fleeing was now stepping onto his land, and nothing about this conflict was going to leave his farm untouched. The shadow near the tree line grew clearer with every passing heartbeat. The rancher felt the air thicken again, that same heavy warning he had sensed earlier on the ridge. This wasn't just a lone watcher now. Something larger was unfolding across his land, stretching from the hills to the abandoned barn and right to the cabin door. The Apache women stood on either side of the fire, both tense and alert, their eyes fixed on the dark as if they already knew what kind of storm was stepping closer. The younger woman glanced at the rancher's boy, who slept with his blanket pulled up to his chin. She hurried to him and gently moved him deeper into the corner, protecting him with her presence. The tall woman stepped to the door, her posture strong but filled with a quiet sorrow. The rancher watched them both, realizing that whatever was about to happen was tied to these women in a way he still didn't fully understand. He moved to the window again and saw the shadow shift. It wasn't a man riding a horse or a settler making his way through the night. It was someone on foot, moving with careful, deliberate steps. The figure paused near the fence, looking toward the cabin with a silent evaluation that made the rancher's stomach twist. Whoever it was, they were not lost and they were not curious. They had come for a reason. The tall woman said a single name under her breath. The rancher recognized the tone. Not a friend, not a protector, someone who brought trouble. The younger woman lowered her head, and the rancher saw the fear in her shoulders. Not fear of danger, but fear of what might happen if the figure reached them. He tightened his grip on the doorframe, fighting the urge to step outside and confront the dark alone. But the tall woman stopped him with a quick gesture. Her eyes said no, not yet, not like this. They needed to understand what stood on the land before reacting. The rancher forced himself to wait. The shadow moved closer, just enough that the faint moonlight touched its outline. He saw broad shoulders, a tall frame, and movements too controlled to belong to a drifter. The figure paused again, then reached down and touched the ground. A signal, a message. Something intentional. The women watched with identical tension, both recognizing the gesture. The younger woman whispered something sharp, filled with emotion, and the tall woman answered with a low, steady tone. The rancher could not understand the words, but he could feel their weight. He stepped toward them, asking with his expression what the shadow meant. The tall woman touched the map again, pointing to a symbol shaped like two lines crossing. Conflict, confrontation, a reckoning. The rancher's pulse pounded hard in his chest. He asked the tall woman by pointing outside if the shadow meant harm to the women. She nodded once, slow, heavy. The rancher felt anger rise, mixing with fear. This was his land now, his home, and he would not let danger walk up to his cabin without standing between it and his boy. He moved toward the door. But the tall woman grabbed his forearm, stopping him with surprising strength. She shook her head again, her eyes fierce, not out of desire to control him, but out of knowing. Her look told him that whoever approached was not someone a single rancher could stand against blindly. The younger woman, still near the boy, lifted her hand toward the tall woman, saying a soft word. Her voice trembled but carried conviction. The tall woman's jaw tightened, and she nodded slowly. The rancher could feel the tension building to the point of breaking. The shadow took 2 steps closer, stopping near the old well. The rancher could see the faint glint of something in the figure's hand. Not a weapon raised, but something held with purpose. Something that belonged to him. His breath caught. It was the woven pouch he had found hanging on the fence days earlier. The figure held it like a claim over the land. A claim over the women. A claim over whatever story was unfolding here. The rancher stepped forward despite the tall woman's warning, unable to stay still. He opened the door a few inches, letting the cold night air flood into the cabin. The figure turned at the sound and finally stepped into full moonlight. It was a man, tall and weathered, with braided hair falling over his shoulders. His face carried strength and old scars. His expression was hard, carved by years of leading others, but his eyes held something more. A fire, a fierce protectiveness, and pain. The tall woman inhaled sharply. The younger woman pressed her hand to her chest. The rancher realized then that this man wasn't just any traveler or warrior. He was connected to these women in a way deeper than words could explain. The figure lifted the woven pouch slightly, not threateningly but deliberately. He said something in the Apache tongue, low and steady. The tall woman answered, her voice even but edged with tension. The exchange felt heavy, filled with history and decisions made long before the rancher ever set foot on this land. The rancher didn't understand the language, but he understood enough from their expressions. The man was asking something of the women, or accusing them, or warning them. The younger woman stepped forward and spoke with fire in her voice. The man turned sharply toward her, his jaw stiffening. The look in his eyes softened only slightly, but it did soften. The tall woman placed a hand on the younger one's shoulder. Grounding her, the rancher knew then that the younger woman's scar mattered here. It wasn't a random injury. It wasn't a simple accident. It was tied to the conflict now standing on his land. He felt a chill as he realized she had been hurt escaping someone or something powerful, and that power had now walked up to his cabin. The man took a step closer. The rancher stepped out fully, placing himself between the man and the doorway. The action surprised even him, but he stood firm. He didn't know the full story yet, but he knew this much. Those women had sought safety, and his boy slept inside. He would not let danger enter without going through him first. The man studied him with unreadable eyes, as if weighing his courage. Then he spoke a single word in English. Not loud, not aggressive, but firm. Why? The rancher held his ground, answering with one steady breath that this was his land now, and whoever the man was. He had to state his purpose before stepping closer. The man's expression tightened. He looked toward the cabin, then back at the rancher. Something in his posture shifted, as if the moment was heavier than either of them realized. The rancher sensed that the man wasn't here by chance. He was caught between protecting someone and confronting a betrayal. The tall woman stepped outside then, walking toward them with slow, careful steps. She placed herself between the two men, her presence commanding without force. She spoke to the man again, her words calm and firm. The rancher watched their exchange. Feeling the tension tighten like a stretched rope, the man's face softened with something that looked almost like sorrow. Then hardened again. Whatever he wanted, whatever conflict had pushed these women onto the rancher's land, it wasn't simple. It wasn't a fight between strangers. It was rooted in something old and personal. The younger woman joined them, moving close to the tall woman. She said something quick, almost pleading. The man looked at her with deep, complicated emotion. The rancher felt the truth sinking in. These three shared a past that had fractured violently. And now, that fracture had reached his farm. The wind rose, carrying the scent of dust and approaching storms. The man stepped closer, and the rancher felt the moment shift again. A breaking point was coming. Something had to give. The tension grew so sharp it felt like the land itself winced. The tall woman lifted her hand in one final motion, stopping both men. The younger woman stepped beside her, their shoulders aligned. The man lowered his head slightly. Not in defeat, not in retreat, but in acknowledgement. Something bigger than all four of them was about to surface. The rancher's boy stirred inside. Waking to the sound of voices. The shadowed ridge that had been quiet all night flickered with movement again. The conflict, whatever shape it carried, was closing in fast, pressing all of them toward a moment none of them could avoid, and the path to the climax began tightening around the ranch, leaving no one untouched, no story isolated, and no heart safe from what was coming next. The rancher felt the tension reach its breaking point. The tall woman's lifted hand froze the knight in place, stopping the man from taking another step and stopping the rancher from answering his challenge. The air felt charged, almost vibrating with unspoken histories and choices waiting to be made. The younger woman's breath shook slightly as she stepped closer to her companion, the firelight catching the scar on her arm. The rancher understood then that whatever had torn this group apart had left real wounds, not just on the body, but deep in the spirit. The man who had stood on the ridge finally lowered his head. Only then did the rancher realize that the man wasn't just a wanderer or a pursuer. He was connected to these women in a way, bound up in duty, loss, and something that might have once been trust. The tall woman moved in front of him, speaking softly in their language. Her voice carried a mix of strength and sadness, the kind that comes from telling truth without hiding behind anger. The younger woman stepped forward, her voice clearer now, no longer trembling. She spoke directly to the man, and the rancher could tell she was explaining how she had been hurt and why she fled to the abandoned farm. Her hands moved as she spoke, touching her scar, then placing her palm over her heart. The tall woman added her own words, steady and sure. The man listened, his expression tightening with regret. The rancher felt the conflict unravel piece by piece. The man wasn't here to capture or harm them. He had been searching for them because they were part of a small traveling group, family or something close to it, who had become separated after trouble struck near the mountain line weeks before. The younger woman's injury had caused her to fall behind, and the tall woman had refused to leave her. They had taken the old trail through the rancher's land, hiding from danger until they knew they were safe. The man had followed the signs they left, desperate to bring them home. When the tall woman finished speaking, the man looked at the rancher and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that needed no translation. The rancher nodded back, understanding more than words could explain. His fear dissolved, replaced by something warm and solid. These were not people running from wrongdoing. They were survivors trying to protect one another. The rancher's boy peeked out of the cabin, rubbing his eyes, sensing the shift in the air. The young Apache woman smiled gently at him, offering reassurance. The rancher stepped aside, inviting the man indoors so they could talk away from the cold night wind. The tall woman entered first, followed by the younger one, who guided the boy back to his blanket. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warmly, chasing away the last bits of fear. The rancher poured water into cups while the tall woman explained more of their story, using a mix of gestures and a few English words. The man added what he could in his slow, careful speech. They told him about the lands they had crossed and the danger that had scattered their group near the low canyon ridge. They had taken refuge on his farm because it lay along one of their ancestral paths, a route their people had used for generations. The rancher realized the abandoned farm he bought wasn't just a cheap piece of land. It carried history and meaning far older than he knew. The man placed the woven pouch gently on the table. The rancher understood that it wasn't a claim of ownership. It was a message, a call for unity, a sign that the land connected their stories now. He accepted the pouch with respect, acknowledging that he was part of something larger than his own hardships. The younger woman sat with the boy, showing him beads from her pouch, teaching him how each color carried a meaning. The rancher watched them, his heart easing for the first time since he arrived on this land. The tall woman spoke softly to the rancher, telling him through simple phrases and gestures that they meant no harm and were grateful for the shelter he offered. She promised their presence on his farm would only bring peace, not trouble. When morning light finally broke across the plains, the world looked different, golden and calm. The man inspected the land with the rancher, pointing out signs of an animal trail near the creek and a safe place where a small group could rest without disturbing the farm. The rancher showed him the repaired fences and talked with slow, patient words about his plans to bring the soil back to life. The man nodded, offering help with clearing brush using knowledge passed through his people. The Apache women prepared a stew with herbs the rancher had never seen. The boy tasted it and smiled, saying it felt warm in his chest. The rancher tried it too and felt something. Similar, comfort, connection, eh? sensed that the fear and danger from the night had shifted into understanding. By midday, the man and the two women sat outside with the rancher and his boy, sharing stories through gestures, drawings in the dirt, and simple words. The younger woman explained that the scar she carried was from a fall during the chaos. When their group was attacked by wild animals near the canyon, they had become separated and she couldn't keep pace. The tall woman refused to leave her behind. The rancher listened closely. Feeling admiration for their bond, the man revealed that he had been following their signs for days, worried that something worse had happened. When he saw the woven pouch hanging on the ranch fence, he knew they had taken shelter here. He hadn't approached right away because he feared the women might be hiding from danger still. The rancher understood his caution. The frontier demanded careful steps. As the day grew warmer, the man asked if they could stay for a short time until the younger woman regained her strength. The rancher agreed without hesitation. His land had room, and after everything they had faced together, helping them felt right. The tall woman thanked him by placing a small carved stone into his hand, a symbol of protection meant to guard a home. Days passed peacefully. The women helped around the cabin, teaching the boy how to weave thin branches into sturdy baskets. The man showed the rancher a method of reading the soil to find the best place to plant new crops. Slowly, the abandoned farm began to feel less broken. Weeds cleared. Soil turned rich. Life pushed its way back into the land. The rancher discovered that the trail running through his land wasn't a burden but a blessing. Travelers passed respectfully, leaving small tokens of goodwill near the fence. His boy learned new words, new meanings, and new ways of listening to the land. The Apache women smiled more often, their fear replaced with calm. When the time came for the three visitors to continue their journey, the rancher felt a quiet ache. They had become part of the rhythm of the farm. The man approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder, thanking him in his own language before adding simple English words that carried great weight. Good man, good land. The tall woman gave the rancher's boy a small bead bracelet for luck. The younger woman touched the rancher's hand lightly, gratitude shining in her eyes. The rancher wished them safety on their path, knowing their presence had changed his life more than they could ever know. As they walked toward the ridge, the sun caught their silhouettes, blending them into the vast landscape they belonged to. The rancher stood with his boy beside him, watching the three figures make their way across the trail that had carried so much fear and then so much healing. The boy leaned closer and asked if they would ever come back. The rancher smiled, his voice steady with hope. He said the land had a way of bringing people together when the time was right, and he believed that someday they would return, not as strangers seeking safety but as friends coming home. The abandoned farm was abandoned no more. It had become a place of healing, a place of unity, a place where fear had transformed into trust. The rancher felt grateful for the chance he had taken when he bought this forgotten piece of earth. It gave him a fresh start, a safe home for his boy, and a bond with people whose roots ran deep across the land. And as the wind carried soft whispers across the plains, the rancher knew the story of that night would stay alive forever, reminding him that sometimes the most unexpected visitors bring the strongest blessings.